Okay, we're going to be talking right now to Kate Lincoln-Goldfinch. Kate, before we start this thing, I want to tell you something that I hope will make you smile. I had originally tried to reach you, you may know, a couple of weeks ago. We were trying to start this process of getting you on the show. And I spent a lot of time studying what you do. And here's the fascinating thing to me. I don't see how anybody can do as much as you managed to do. I looked at your schedule on most days. You are places, you do things, not only in immigration, but in women's empowerment, in all sorts of activities. And it seems like you spend almost all of your waking time doing some good somewhere. So, you know, over the weekend when they were releasing the new movie, The Marvels, I was kind of expecting you to be somewhere in there. Good morning. Thanks for joining. No, seriously, you're amazing. Thanks for joining us this morning on You Talk. I'm glad I made you smile. I'm Steve Hunter. Kate, what you worried about? Let's put it this way. What are you worried about the whole immigration situation right now?
Man.
Where do you start, huh?
Well, there's a lot to be concerned with at the moment. It's either HB4 or SB4. They're identical laws that they criminalize entering the state of Texas, the country, without permission. And they create state crimes for illegal entry, essentially. So 6 months for the first entry, a year for any subsequent entry. But one of the most concerning provisions of the proposed legislation is the refusal to return, so that once an immigrant serves their time, then the idea is they will be taken back to the border, and if they don't cross over out of the country, they can be subject to up to 20 years in prison. And there's so many problems with that, but I'll pause and let you sort of guide me.
Well, there's one other lovable cause of this little proposed legislation, which, of course, I'm sure you're right, which is if that person is apprehended and going through all the steps, one of the things they're going to be doing is asking before they're released from state custody, they're going to be going through, if I understand this properly, through all that person's immigration information, all their ID information. They're going to be checking against every possible database in the country to see if this person's got any other charges, any other problems, if they come off the border before or anything, so that ultimately they're building a whole agenda here of an ability to prosecute somebody who has come across the border illegally. Am I understanding that properly? I mean, this is all fun stuff.
Well, it's just, if you think about it, the immigration system is incredibly complex. So someone can be in legal status in really hundreds of ways. They could be under a work visa or have a work permit or be in removal proceedings or have a green card case pending or have a green card. There's just, my whole career is built on this. So I promise you it's very complicated. And what they are proposing is having not only state police officers essentially become immigration, enforcers, which creates racial profiling and all sorts of issues. But like you said, once these immigrants, let's assume someone is apprehended, they're prosecuted, they serve their time, then what? A state criminal judge is supposed to determine this person's legal status or lawful status in the United States and then order them to be removed when, in fact, the jurisdiction over that lies within the federal government, the immigration court system. So an immigration judge is the one who decides whether someone is deported or not. And it's a court system, so there's due process rights. There's the right to present testimony and evidence and to appeal any decisions. And the state would just sort of pretend like that doesn't exist. And, this was one of the many objections that came up in the committees last week. I was with various colleagues of mine to testify against this legislation. And as lawyers, this is what we shared. There's preemption issues. This is just a mess. It's a complete mess.
The preemption issue being that this intrudes on the federal laws that are already in place, right? Which is
exactly, that's right.
Highly controversial.
Yes, right. And it doesn't achieve the objective. In fact, one of the representatives in the House committee, Representative Raymond, kept saying, "Okay, so guys," he was talking to the people on the committee with him. So what are we doing? Let's say someone gets taken back to the border and they want to ask for asylum. What are we doing about that? And they just sort of ignored the question and passed the bill right through the committee. And it's like, at the end of the day, all of these migrants have due process rights. They have the right to go before an immigration judge. And so Texas is not even going to achieve its aim, but we know that that's not ultimately the goal. I mean, look at Operation Lone Star, $75 billion and fewer than $10 billion and fewer than 1% of the border apprehensions have resulted from Operation Lone Star. So none of this stuff is about efficacy or actually achieving an end, in my opinion. It's about making it look like Republicans and Abbott are tough on border enforcement and they're doing something about the immigration problem, even though it doesn't help anything.
Oh, none of this, of course, has anything to do with politics, right? Nothing, particularly Republican politics. This is all cold judgment about what the state needs. So let me ask two questions. Well, first of all, just a fact. Now, you may be aware that a few days ago, the U.S. Census Bureau issued an interesting report as they were looking at their projections. And the projection is that now, sometime between 2060 and 2080, that's not very far away, by the way, our population in the U.S. will stall. It will basically hang at about the same number. And by 2080, the U.S. population is expected for the first time in history to actually begin to drop. Now, that's partly, of course, because this bunch of weird, troublesome people called the baby boomers are going to start dying off, and they're not people sufficient to replace them. Of course, the continued aging of the U.S. population is going to change a little bit because a large part of that huge hump of the baby boomers is going to be passing away. That's not a good thought. But the point is, we're not going to have a lot of young workers. Great time for us to decide we're going to do everything we can to discourage anybody from coming across the border, because some of these things, of course, are going to be in effect only in Texas, unless, of course, we see a bunch of other states decide, woohoo, good idea, good Republican politics. Let's put in a lot more state requirements and penalties for people that maybe aren't fully documented. And that might be in New York State or Florida or Michigan or Wisconsin or a million other places. People coming across the Canadian border. People from a whole lot of places other than Mexico. So here's the question I'm working toward. If I'm somebody who believes that the southern border is a problem, that it has to be fortified, we can't have people coming across, we're looking at this law. What's wrong with it? Hey, this just sounds like another way to discourage people coming across. It's not that simple. How about you take it from there?
Sure. Oh, there's so much to say. I mean, the first thing that I would point out is the historical backdrop of U.S. immigration policy. There's this tribalism that drives a lot of people, a lot of fear about, okay, what's going to change? But really, if you look back, in the 1700s, the English immigrants were afraid of the Irish immigrants. They were afraid of the German immigrants. They're going to change our culture. They don't speak our language. They don't share our religion, etc. Then in the 1800s, the aim is toward, Eastern Europeans, Southern Europeans, Italians, Jews, Chinese, migrants. Then in the 1900s, we moved towards Asia, Southeast Asia, Latin America. So it's like any time we have immigrants coming to the United States necessarily to, finish the railroad, to achieve Western expansion, to achieve, semiconductor progress. We rely on immigrants to do this, and there always historically is a group of people in the United States who are afraid of change, and they're tribal, and they say, no, we don't want any more. And you can just look back and see it. And so we're in another period of that. So I think it's really important to frame, what is driving the resistance to immigration, because the reality is what you said about the census, that actually for the first time next year, for the first time in United States history, we're going to have more people over the age of 65 than under the age of 15. And what that means is, like you said, in the very near future, we are running into a significant labor shortage that will absolutely tank our economy. But the beautiful thing is that we have a solution right before our eyes, in that this is an amazing country that people would love to immigrate to. And immigrants are, entrepreneurial, they boost the economy, that we have the need for their labor. There's just all the reasons, all the data point to pro-immigration policy is what is needed. And yet, we have people who are really afraid. Oh, they think that there's a surge at the border, et cetera. The reality of what's happening at the border is that for 20 years plus, we had a system in place where asylum seekers could come to the border and be screened and ask for protection and get deported if they didn't qualify. But all that was shut down under the Trump administration. We completely closed the border to asylum seekers for over 3 years. And only just this May have we partially lifted the ban on asylum. So now we're just slowly starting the process, but this creates a backlog. It creates confusion and, what looks like chaos at the southern border. But we're in this acute and temporary reckoning over what occurred during the Trump administration. The reality is we don't have a surge that we can't handle. We have the ability to receive immigrants on all levels of the skill spectrum, highly skilled, and we need to ask our legislators to create pro-immigration policies that expand the ability of people to immigrate to the United States, because honestly, really, at the end of the day, that is what we need. And anybody that's telling anyone otherwise is lying, and they're using fear as a motivator.
Now, I want to remind everybody that we are wide open for calls because, of course, that's what You Talk is about. Gee, that's funny. The first word of that is you. You Talk. So 713-526-5738. And when you call and you hear that little recording, hi, this is KPFT, that's a nice thing. Oh, good day. My day starts off with KPFT. But hit a little 2, and you'll be talking to Amanda. We're going to put you on the air so you can talk to Kate, Lincoln-Goldfinch, and we can discuss this whole issue of immigration from the bottom line. Now, Kate, our first caller, as it turns out, a guy named Barry, who I have a lot of respect for. Barry's generally speaking kind of contrary and conservative. Barry, I know what you got to say. Well, no, I don't actually know what to say. So what you going to say? So let's toss it to you, buddy. What's your thoughts and what's your questions, your comments?
Contrarian, are you kidding me?
Oh, buddy, I'm saying that jokingly. We're glad you called. Go ahead.
Okay, first question is, are you going to invite the group FAIR, the Federation for American Immigration Reform, on these discussions as well as the other? Are we going to hear from the other side?
We talked about that the other day. Keep going, my friend.
You did. All right, fine. 3 questions for the guests. Are you supporting illegal immigration? No, first of all, are you making the clear distinction between people who go through the legal procedure, stand in line for years, pay thousands of dollars to get here legally, and the ones that come across the border illegally? Or are you making that distinction?
Sure. And, look, I'm an immigration. My profession is an immigration lawyer. I help people who are immigrating through family, through employment.
I don't think that was the question.
Okay, hold on, Barry.
Well, I'm answering your question. Yeah, I'm answering your question. So, of course, I support legal immigration. What I'm saying is that our policies don't support the immigration needs of our economy. So the reality of the situation is there are jobs that need filling that immigrants could fill, but they can't immigrate legally. So we need a new system, an expanded system, so that more legal immigration is possible. Now, separate from that, what we're talking about, there's this sliver of immigration that is asylum. That's people who are coming to ask for protection in the United States. This is a law that's been in place for us since post-World War II, since we as a nation failed to protect Jewish refugees, right? So we said, okay, we're going to sign international treaties and we're going to tell the world that we will protect people who are fleeing persecution. And we codified these laws and we said in our asylum laws, anybody who's in the United States, regardless of how they arrived here, can apply for asylum. That was a 1980 law that's been in place for 43 years.
I have 2 more questions if we run out of time.
Go ahead, Barry.
Whatever they're fleeing from, we didn't cause it. Maybe Mexico needs to clean up its own sewer hole and get rid of the drug cartel and corrupt politicians so it stay at home. Now, Mexico had the toughest immigration laws in the world, yet they get no criticism. People from Guatemala are sent back daily. America is not the dumping ground for illegal aliens and refugees. And let's talk about some running out of workers. Well, we just have more babies. That is no excuse for illegal immigration to say that you're running out of workers.
But
and
Barry,
for America,
we're not going to have more babies. That's the point.
Right. Yeah, it's not happening, Barry. That's the issue.
Okay.
The issue is we're not having children that support the needs for our workers. And what I'll say about Mexico is that here's the deal. First of all, very few of our asylum seekers are actually of Mexican descent. There are some, but we are talking about people who are fleeing Cuba, people who are fleeing Venezuela, and these are migrants who are coming here. We have an allotment of spaces for asylum seekers in the United States. It is something we have agreed to, and so that is what we do. We offer asylum to people who qualify up to a certain point. Now, these people, when they are in Mexico, they are vulnerable as migrants. I've worked with thousands of migrants in Mexico, and what I can tell you is that migrants who are non-Mexican, who are in Mexico, they are the victims of the cartels. They get routinely kidnapped and held for ransom. I could tell you stories and stories and stories of my own clients who did everything they could to keep themselves safe in Mexico, and they weren't able to. So the reality of the situation is Mexico
has caused those problems.
Okay, Barry, hang on a second.
No one's saying that.
I'm going to ask a question, both of you, for half a second. Barry, this is a good point. We don't have the time this morning to completely relitigate the whole situation of lack of legislation, lack of action on the part of Congress for decades now. The whole immigration thing's frankly fall into a big pile of poop. So I want to allow one thing for you, if I may, because I have a lot of respect for you, my friend. One of them is you're opposed to illegal immigration just generally. It's not what you expect to see. The second thing is you obviously accept the fact that we got to have some immigration because we're going to need it for population, for jobs.
Some legal immigration, yes.
That good point. So here's my question. Can we defer that for a few days, because that's not what she's here for, is to relitigate this whole thing from starters. That's a darn good show. Boys, it's going to be a very exciting show when we sit down sometime in a few days and we say, let's start from the whole question of what is our role in the world, and are we still that shining thing on the hill where people can hope to come to, and if our own policies are so screwed up and so complicated that they can't get here without a whole lot of money and a whole lot of trouble, then we probably need to change those policies. Would you and I basically agree on that part?
We're still the shining hill. The shining city on the hill, and our policies are America first.
Okay, to
make America great again.
I got it. All right, now, there's another conversation.
Border illegal aliens will do what? Destroy America.
Okay, Barry, and by the way, interestingly enough, as you know, once they come across the border, very often these people wind up voting Republican. How about that? So it's not a bad thing. Barry,
I don't want any illegal alien voters voting Republican.
Okay, but all right, Barry, to be continued, my friend. Barry, you always light up my day. Thanks for giving us a call. Let's go down to Colby. Colby, good morning. You are on You Talk, and hold on. Now you're on the air. What's on your mind, my friend? What's up, Colby?
Well, I got a couple.
Uh-oh.
First, I think that Abbott busing migrants to sanctuary city
is
to illegally immigrate. And second, I think that if you were to ask somebody why illegal immigration is a problem, I think you would get a multitude of answers, ranging from, well, I think they're a burden on our system. I think they cost us tax dollars. I think they raise crime. I think my culture is
under assault.
At threat.
Gotcha.
So I think if you were to chip away at some of these arguments and whittle it down, you might find that, okay, well, if you think it's a money problem, you're a little misled because they contribute tax dollars more than they consume. And then crime, statistically speaking, U.S. citizens commit crimes at a much higher rate than illegal immigrants because, they have to be on their best behavior. So I think a lot of it boils down to racism and xenophobia. And then, maybe some people, it is a money thing, but I think they just need to be a little more informed.
Some of it's just that gut level, us versus them. Whoop, I don't have any them around, so, here's another them I can be against. That's a good point. Colby, thanks, buddy. That's a little bit of wisdom at a time we could use some. We're talking, for everybody's information, to Kate Lincoln-Goldfinch. She's an extraordinary lawyer from Austin who also gets involved in women's affairs, other things, empowerment, a lot of things, just good work in general. We're going to talk about that in a couple of minutes also. But let's go for a minute to Roberto. Roberto, you got a quick question or a comment. You're on the air, buddy.
I guess I wanted to ask Kate, what economic ails does she foresee as a result of her contracting population? Because I mean, if it's like housing market going down, like wouldn't that just mean more affordable housing or like land becoming available or jobs becoming available to people that maybe didn't have that upward mobility because there was, let's say, a baby boomer there. Then that person dies. Now there's upward mobility for that person. But you're saying that there are this ability for these immigrants to fill these particular positions. But if they're so intelligent, why wouldn't they be fixing their own country? And I'm not saying that from like a I hate immigrants thing. I'm just like generalizing the question.
I want to toss one thing in real quickly, Roberto. Just as a journalist, in many of those countries, it can't be fixed. If you're a young person, you're extremely talented, you got a family, and it doesn't matter whether that's a description or not. If you're just a human being, there's not much you can do in some of those countries about changing that, maybe for decades. Oh, and in the process, you may get shot or ripped off or forced into a gang and your kids and everything else. So there's just a lot of stuff in it. And a second thing, and I want to turn this over in a second to Kate. Kate is not an economist. She didn't come to talk about that. However, knowing that she's extremely bright, I'm sure she has some opinions on this. Kate, you want to pick it up? What do you think?
Yeah, I'd love to. This is such a great conversation. So the reality is that we have massive labor shortages on, like I said, all swaths of the skill spectrum. So in the semiconductor industry, sort of high-level innovation, engineering, technology. So the main visa that we use for that is the H-1B visa, and 65% of those visas go to work in engineering, computers, biotech, renewables. And just to give you a sense, there's a lottery system, and last year only 1 in 7 applicants was selected for the lottery, and these are people who already have jobs at U.S. companies. So that just gives you a sense of what's missing in the high-level sector.
Now, this is a lottery to choose people who have already applied and now are going to actually be allowed to come into the United States. So at this point, that's only allowing 1 in 7 people who want to come in actually making it to the U.S. That tells us all by itself the legal immigration system is broken. Roberto?
Isn't that a system that preserves the ability for American citizens to have higher opportunities at those jobs, even though they might be slightly less qualified, and then to learn I think that kind of information on the job? I mean,
so this is a refrain over time that if an immigrant takes a job, that necessarily means that they are taking a job from a native-born American. The data does not support that. What the data shows is that immigrants create more jobs, create more opportunities. They tend to be much more entrepreneurial than U.S. citizens, and over the years, many, many studies have shown over and over that immigrants expand the economy and create jobs. But I also want to cover, because we're not just talking about highly skilled immigrants, this is all levels. So when we see in the agricultural sector really suffering because they can't find labor, and you see things like the state of Iowa passing child labor laws to allow meat processing facilities to employ 14-year-olds and to indemnify these companies from injuries on the job to these children. I mean, this is what is occurring to fill these labor shortages in the country, and it's only getting worse because as the baby boomers age, not only do they leave the workforce, but they also need to be cared for. So the service, like the medical, the service industry, caring for the elderly, in all of these, everywhere you look, we already have a problem. It's only going to get worse as time goes on. And I can tell you what's going to happen is we're going to have this resistance to immigration based on this anti-immigrant rhetoric that's just going to go on and on until things get so bad that Congress has to pass a law. And why don't we go ahead and just get ahead of that and acknowledge that this is a nation built on immigrants. This is a pro-immigration country that needs immigration. For the people who are already here need immigration. That is the reality. And anybody that tells you otherwise, I'll say it again, is lying.
Roberto, good point by everything you're saying.
You're talking about semiconductors, which is very specialized. I mean, how many semiconductor plants exist in America? I'm sure quite a few of them have been created by immigrants. But the technology relies mostly on machinery, not necessarily the individual workers. They might rely on 5 people creating semiconductor architectures that become patented. I mean, you can go over to 3M and see some of that stuff. But and then in the agricultural sense, isn't part of the free market supposed to allow industries to rise and collapse? And if we're reducing our population, wouldn't that also reduce our population on the agricultural component? So,
Roberto, if we don't need people to produce these things, I hope you can go out and explain that to Apple so they don't have all these people working in China and elsewhere frantically trying to make iPhones and other things. We do. That does still need people, not at the, hey, I'm going to design a chip. By the way, just a quick thing. One of my insights over the last few days, brilliant insight. When I was a kid growing up, I kept wondering, what is manifest destiny? What was our manifest destiny? We were roaring across toward the west, seizing more and more of the country. Well, first of all, it was to create California, but the second was obviously to someday manufacture amazing chips. We finally reached our manifest destiny. We need people to make those things, or we're shipping it all over to China. We don't really necessarily want that, and I'm not necessarily anti-Chinese or anti-anything. But this is all very complicated, and we get back to that same thing. Congress, wake up. Turn this into some kind of rational system where people can get in, and above all, where people in the southern part of the Western Hemisphere can get out of countries that don't work and come to one that does and contribute to it. And those people actually turn out pretty darn well by and large. Roberto, really good questions, my friend. To be continued. Promise you, this is a great conversation for the future. And I want to go to Rico, who's our engineer here, and he's one of our good morning crew here every morning. Rico, you had a question or comment. What is it, buddy?
Yeah, so I wanted to ask Miss Kate about the razor wire buoys along the border, and I guess what your involvement is with that, if any.
Sure. Yeah. So the razor wire buoys are part of Operation Lone Star, which, as I mentioned, has spent $10 billion of Texas taxpayer dollars, which represents 1/6 of the overall education budget, just to give you a sense of how much money goes into this program. So the buoys were placed by Abbott in the Rio Grande, which immediately drew backlash, a lawsuit from the federal government and from the government of Mexico, because it violates international water treaties. It, impedes federal enforcement authority. So it drew a lot of backlash to the state of Texas. Not only that, but it also creates, of course, humanitarian issues, because people have died. People have drowned in these buoys that are really meant to harm people. They have razor wire on them. They have netting below them. And the intention is to stop people from coming across the river, even if that means that they die, even if that means that they are children. So right now the buoys are in place. There's litigation ongoing. The Abbott was originally ordered to remove them. Then the injunction was paused on appeal. So right now that litigation is pending. And I also want to return back to the conversation about the buses. The 2 callers ago, the person mentioned Abbott busing migrants, which is also part of Operation Lone Star. And I think it's really important to highlight this because it's another money dump. Since last April, the state of Texas has spent $75 million to private bus charters to pick up migrants who have already been processed into the United States and to take them to places like New York, Chicago, Denver, etc. The entire purpose of this operation is to cause chaos in these cities so that it appears as if we have a border surge or an immigration problem. But what generally happens with migrants when they come in and they get processed, they all have somewhere to go, right? They have a family member, or they have a friend, they're headed to Maryland, or they're headed to San Francisco, and they make their way on their own, usually via Greyhound bus, in my experience. What's happening instead is that Abbott goes and gets a private bus charter and brings all these migrants to D.C. voluntarily, and then dumps them somewhere where they have, like their cell phones have died. They have no access to get to where they need to go, and it creates the illusion of a problem that riles up the entire country. That's been the whole point, and frankly, it's been successful. But all that needed to happen was to just let these migrants go in through their natural flow to where they were going to go anyway. So I think it's really important to highlight that because the media gets it wrong.
Now, by the way, there are two sides to all of this, and we got that. And I promise you, those who called, like Barry a minute ago, with the downside of some of the things Kate's in favor of, and then, frankly, to be blunt, as somebody who has no opinions, no, frankly, I'm on Kate's side on almost all this. We have to do something reasonable, and that's the problem. We don't have a reasonable system anywhere along the line dealing with this. And Rico, thanks for your question. There's another member of our Good Morning crew that shows up pretty often, Richard Hanna. And as you know, Kate, Richard's actually the guy, he's the reason you're here this morning, because he did the interface, reached out to Tim and Selma and arranged to get you here. Richard, good morning. You're on You Talk, my friend. What you got to say to Kate Lincoln-Goldfinch?
Kate, I don't think people really understand the seriousness of these laws that the government is putting out. I know we have a lot of issues going on in the United States right now, but the fact that I can be driving my friend around and I don't know his immigration status, and we get pulled over and they find something in his status, I can also be pulled in along with him to check the immigration status, and I'll be brought in as an accessory. And we talked about racial profiling before with Sandra Bland and these other issues, these other cases in the United States. And I really don't think people. I know the state on the state level they really don't care because it's a political deal. But when you start enforcing this in these small towns, and am I correct? Local police in not in Harris County, but these small police forces can enforce immigration issues. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Hi, Richard. That is correct, and it's really concerning. You're right. What this bill does is it's essentially, in Arizona and Florida, they've passed these, so-called "show me your papers" laws. This is Texas's version of that. So what it does is it says any law enforcement officer in the state of Texas, maybe it's a rural sheriff or a local police officer, they are authorized to arrest, detain, and charge people who entered the country illegally. Now, in the committee, there was this conversation about how on earth is a police officer in Dallas going to be able to, get probable cause for illegal entry without racially profiling someone. And, of course, the author of the bill's response was, oh, well, that's not my intention. My intention is that this will be only, enacted on the border where law enforcement officers are actually, witnessing people crossing. But, of course, that's not in the legislation. So the reality of the legislation is it's going to authorize police officers all over the state of Texas to start targeting people who might look like immigrants and arresting them. And it will absolutely 100% lead to racial profiling. There's just zero doubt about that. And, what we've seen also, to those of us who may not be concerned about racial profiling, let's say someone listening is like, oh, well, that's not me, that's not my problem. The economy of Texas is going to be impacted by this because what happens when these laws get passed is immigrants flee, conferences get canceled, people stop visiting the state of Texas because they're afraid to come here, and we all suffer economically as a result of these laws. But Greg Abbott and the Republicans in the Texas legislature do not care. They do not care that the impact of this law is actually unhelpful and harmful. They've been told that over and over and over. So we all need to buckle up because this is going to be a big deal.
Now, Kate, I know that we only have you until 8:40, which is about 2 minutes from right now. I think you have other things you have to do. And I want to stop for a second before we move on. First of all, you have your own practice in Austin, right? Lincoln-Goldfinch practice of law, and obviously you specialize in immigration. I want to give that. But for a moment, I want to stop and ask you about your activities about empowering young women and women in general. Do you want to can we pivot on that for a second? Do you want to talk about that for a minute? Because I think that's pretty extraordinary.
Sure.
Grab it.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm a mother. I have 2 young children, and I'm good friends with a lot of law moms like me, and we struggle, honestly. We do our best to be lawyers and moms, and then also to be people ourselves who matter. And what we find is that women lawyers, moms, are really fantastic lawyers. We're really good at that. And we're really great moms, even though we oftentimes give ourselves a really hard time. But that third leg of the stool, about taking care of ourselves and mattering and having hobbies and getting self-care and all that stuff, we tend to just deprioritize that as we raise our children and pursue our careers. And so Law Moms Out Loud and the work that we do is really about prioritizing ourselves as lawyer moms and letting that matter as much as our titles of being a lawyer and a mom.
Okay, now I want to thank you first of all, because we're coming in literally in the last seconds of the time we agreed for you this morning. I want to thank you for your generosity in taking some time. I know you were literally an incredibly busy person. As I said, I spent some time tracking the things you do a few weeks ago when it was obvious we were going to have you on at some point as a guest, and I was just astounded by the things you managed to accomplish in any given day. So, first of all, clone yourself. We need more of you. And secondly, hopefully we can handle some more of these problems and the insanities of this immigration system that we're dealing with, and also this question of, as Barry said quite rightly a while ago, of a bunch of countries around us who really make it very difficult to be citizens in those countries, that no possibility for a real life, and where our role is and all that. These are things that we still have to have a long, long conversation about, and you added a lot of wisdom to that today. Thank you so much for being our guest on U-Talk.